Hi, I'm Megan. Welcome to today's live reading of Refrain by Madelynne Ellis, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Join me. Chapter 1, Xane. Early June, Southampton, UK. Don't die. I'll never fucking forgive you if you die. The miserable rain wouldn't let up. It dripped into his eyes and hammered incessantly against Zane's head and back as he folded himself over Spook's prone form. The cacophony of it drummed in his ears in place of the heartbeat he was frantically trying to detect. Spook, goddamn it, please. What did he do? What the fuck did he do? Why wouldn't his fingers work? He managed to wrestle his phone from his pocket. Ambulance, he barked at it. So many questions, too many that he didn't have answers to. The moment the operator ended the call, he hit speed dial for Luther. Shipping containers about 100 yards from the bus. Spook's out cold. He's been attacked. Badly hurt? His boyfriend asked. There's blood everywhere. He's a fucking mess. Tell me you called an ambulance first. Of course, fucking get here, please. Hang tight. I'm already on my way. Luther continued to talk to him, but Xane dropped the phone so that he could strip off his leather jacket and gently cover Spook's shoulders. It did little to keep off the rain. Fucking weather never cut you a break when you needed one. By the time Luther skidded to a halt beside him, Xane was wet through and shaking so hard he could barely communicate. His lover dropped the bus's first aid kit between them, but didn't bother opening it. Sticking plasters weren't going to cut it. He fell onto his bare knees and entwined Xane in a rough hug. Ash is watching for the ambulance. Help's coming. Who did this, Xane? Who did this? I don't know. He croaked into the warmth of Luther's shoulder. Is he breathing? I don't know if he's still breathing. Heedless of the dirty red puddle, Luther leaned right down so that his cheek was on level with Spook's mouth. He is. He's still with us, Xane. He's hanging in there. What he needs is for you to do the same. Take a breath for me, eh? His hand touched Zane's face, bringing both focus and comfort. Steve, he blurted, he wasn't nearly this badly. That event was imprinted directly over top of the present. Steve, blood erupting from his nose in a gush outside the casino in Monte Carlo. Red everywhere. Red as the pool they were kneeling in. Red as the rivulets coursing over Steve's parted lips and mingling with the hairs of his designer scruff. Red as spilled ketchup. Red as the entire side of Spook's head. He should have stayed with him. Should have never taken his eyes off of him. Xane, it'll be okay. The gleam in Luther's mismatched eyes was too bright. Don't promise me. You don't know that. What happened to Steve was a freak accident. He was alone. This wasn't the same. We're right here, and you don't have to let Spook out of your sight, not for a second. Nothing's going to spirit him away. You can ride with him to the hospital. They'll be here soon, but only if you keep it together. Otherwise, you'll be no use to him. Do you understand me, Xane? Nod that you understand. I get it. Yeah. Yeah? He shivered, desperate to rid himself of the clammy sensation creeping over his skin. I'm good. Luther squeezed his arm. Another few minutes, that's all. The sound of running feet had them both turning. Rock Giant's moss green hair settled like fronds of seaweed over his eyes as he slid to a halt, sending a spray of water into the air. Which bastard did this? Ronnie Bush shunted in behind him, canopying them with a corporate golfing umbrella. Shouldn't we get him out of the puddle? I don't think we should move him. Luther reached a protective arm over Spook's prone form. Let's leave it to the experts, eh? He's not at risk of drowning, only getting cold. On cue, Rock Giant shrugged off his coat and spread it over top of Zane's jacket. Where's Allie? Has someone told her? Allie, Christ, yes. Xane hadn't given so much as a thought to Spook's girlfriend. Hard to think of her as that after watching his friend actively avoid relationships for the best part of a decade. Someone ought to tell her what had happened. I have her number in my phone if you want to call. It's okay. I've got it. Ronnie passed the umbrella to Paul and then hunched against the shelter of the nearest shipping container to see his phone screen. It was more likely that Allie would pick up a call from Ronnie. While she had taken what had gone down between him and Spook back in Gothenburg a darn sight better than his girlfriend, that didn't mean she wasn't holding a grudge. Fuck, it was all a right bloody mess in all too literal sense. I'm not getting a reply. I even tried calling, went straight to voicemail. Could just be shitty reception, Luther griped. An electronic chirp sounded nearby. Did you hear that? Xane asked. Hear what? The answer was evidently no. Rock Giant mushed his lips together, which lent his jawline to an extra granite-like quality. Wasn't she hanging out with Danny and Mrs. Gore today? Maybe give one of them a try. Luther? Xane prompted his lover. Danny had barely said a word to him in the last 12 hours. It was unlikely she'd take his call, and being used as a messenger service to reach Spook's girlfriend was going to go down like a lead balloon regardless of the emergency. I'll try. Luther rose and backed away from their huddle. His absence left a chill down the side of Zane's body. The shakes hit him again as a continual tremor. Paul, will you try Jenny? Would do, the big guy said, if I had her number. Why don't you? He had been in possession of it. They all had. Ash purged it from my contact list before the wedding. Something about unnecessary schmoozing. Seriously, he's lost his marbles since they cut the cake. All I asked was whether she had a spare pair of fishnets I could book. Not now, eh? Luther cut in. I'm not getting a response. I'm still not having any joy either, Ronnie remarked, and I've sent it to auto redial. Xane swore he heard another electronic chirp. Luther rejoined Xane on his knees, having stuffed his phone back into one of his many pockets. Danny's going straight to voicemail. Wherever the ladies are, it's obviously a reception dead zone. Maybe Ash, Rock Giant began. Let's not distract him. It was far more important that Ash directed the paramedics to the right place. Xane didn't want them delayed, even by a second. Time drizzled on. Xane wound his fingers around Spook's wrist. There was a certain measure of relief in feeling the steady rhythm of Spook's pulse. He'd frozen in place by the time the paramedics arrived, breaking the stillness that had settled around them like a shroud. He had to uncurl each finger separately, then his legs protested him rising too. Bits of gravel clung to the skin of his knees. He knew he ought to feel sore, but he couldn't feel much of anything anymore. He'd stopped being cold, though evidently he was still shaking as someone wrapped a blanket around his shoulders. Is he okay? Xane asked. One of the paramedics shone a light into his eyes. I want to go with him, he blurted as the ambulance crew were hopping into the interior with Spook strapped to a trolley. Maybe get dried off and follow. No, Xane threw off the blanket. I need to be with him. Luther wrapped him up again. It's important, he told the woman. She inclined her head as if to say, your call, but you're going to stay wet. Like he cared about that. Steve had died because he'd let him go. There was no way he was leaving Spook. Fine, just stay out of the way. She pointed him at a seat. Buckle in, don't move. Luther slipped Zane's phone back into his hand and kissed him goodbye. Keep us updated. We'll find Allie. And you'll explain to Danny? She'll get it, Xane. No explanation necessary. He didn't quite have Luther's faith. Maybe she'd understand that Spook needed him right now, and maybe it'd be confirmation that he cared more for Spook than he did for her. It wasn't true. He didn't rank the people he loved. What she had to understand was that while he'd apologize for his action as many times as she'd like, he'd never regret making them. Time over, he'd do the same thing again. And if he was really the man she wanted him to be, the man worthy of her love, she'd never ask him to do otherwise. The slam of the ambulance door snapped him out of his thoughts. It didn't matter. None of it did. The only thing of importance right now was Spook. He clasped his friend's ice-cold hand. Stay with me, eh? The words were as much for his benefit as Spook's. He wasn't even sure Spook could hear him. Spook came round as they reached A&E, but he only croaked his name to the paramedics before falling back into silence. He held onto Zane's fingers through the bars on the bed as they wheeled him along the hospital corridors from one place to the next. X-rays, CT scan, a stream of nurses and doctors pushing needles into his veins, taking blood and attaching monitors. There was no brain bleed, no cracked skull, so no surgery needed, just a vicious cut that glue couldn't hold together. Xane had to turn his head when they got the staple gun out. Even the sound of it made his gut churn. By the time they were done, Spook was paler than the bedsheets. Leastways, the bits that weren't a motley of red and purples. One of his eyes was glued closed. Half of his face was swollen, almost to the point of him being unrecognizable. He'll be fine, one junior doctor reassured him. They all introduced themselves, but Xane couldn't remember a single name. It's all soft tissue damage. It'll heal. It looks bad now, but there shouldn't be any long-term issues. Just a scar you won't see under all that hair. Funny how no one mentions the psychological scarring, though there were plenty of questions about how it happened. Xane had endured enough counseling in his life to admit there were benefits while still retaining a degree of skepticism over its worth. Spook had once likened his time in therapy to the Cold War, but maybe it was time to start addressing the fundamental issues that had gotten them to this point. Playing hedgehog did nothing for the internal bruising. The truth was that they were both so riddled with scar tissue it was a wonder either of them ever managed to get out of bed. It seemed to take forever for them to wind back up in a bed space. Graham Callahan, Black Halo's formidable manager, appeared and exchanged some words with the staff. That eventually bought them some privacy. An isolation room at the end of the main ward. A visit from the cops followed, all to no effect. Xane told them what he knew, which was nothing, and Spook continued his unnerving silence, only making the odd indrawn hiss when someone fussing over his wounds applied a little too much pressure. Perhaps questions could wait a while, the doctor advised when the coppers started getting impatient. He has concussion and multiple other injuries. It's going to hurt to talk right now, and while I appreciate you want answers, the last thing my patient needs is agitating. Some sort of drip got wired up to feed him a steady supply of pain relief. Xane understood the officer's frustration. He was on edge waiting for answers too. Spook's silence, if he was honest, scared him more than the injuries. Evening rolled around before they got any time alone. Spook refused to eat anything, even a jelly pot. Xane didn't have much of an appetite either, but he'd been shown the vending machine, and it was on his third cup of horrible coffee and halfway through a packet of cheesy puffs. What the hell happened? I was only gone a couple of minutes. Did you see them? How many were there? What did they want? Given the press piece that had landed that morning, it was hard not to draw conclusions. Spook turned his head so that Xane was staring at a patchwork of bruises. He got up and walked around the bed. Get real, Spook. I'm not the police. It's me. Who the fuck did this to you? Do you know? The heart monitor made a sudden bleat, and Xane watched the trace on the little screen climb. Spook didn't turn away this time. It probably hurt too much, but he did pull his gaze away from Zane's. You know, I know you know. Okay, you don't have to say, not if you don't want to. Probably hurts to talk, right? The wounds he could see were bad enough, and shit, he didn't want to open the old ones. But they didn't do anything more, right? Not more than this? Spook's one good eye lasered him. He clasped Zane's shirt front, reeling him in until his ear was only a hair's breadth away from Spook's lips. Allie, he croaked. The dry raps sent Xane into a dichotomous state of rapture and despair. Hearing Spook speak, even a single word was good, but the rusty croak leaking from his windpipe, that was troubling. The guys went to find her. They'll bring her. No. The alarm on the monitor started pinging again. Hey, hold up. Are you worried about her? Was she with you? She couldn't have been. There'd been no sign of anyone else. Xane pulled his thoughts back to the rain-drenched shipyard, the rusty tang in the air, seagulls screeching overhead, worn concrete hard against his knees, and the guys gathered around trying to reach her. And that burr on his senses, the twittering chirp. It was obvious what it was now. He'd heard it every time one of them dialed. A terrifying vision of her sprawled out, just as broken as Spook, only a few paces from where they had all been assaulted. Where they'd all been assaulted him. Shit, he reached for his phone, only for Spook's fist to tighten on his shirt again. He shook his head the tiniest degree. Don't bring her here. No? No. Spook? Another tiny head shake. Okay, but I can guarantee she's going to want to see you. I know you're not at your prettiest, but in these sorts of circumstances, women don't give a shit about that sort of thing. Promise me. Always, but you realize your girlfriend's as stubborn as a fucking mule. I'm not sure no is in her vocabulary, so short of physically restraining her, I'm not sure. Spook's one good eye remained on him. The other was closed tight, the skin so swollen and tight it hurt to look at. Still, Spook didn't break his gaslight glare, not even to blink. Xane raised his hands. I'll do what I can. I don't know if the guys have even tracked her down yet. They surely have had to. They surely have. They surely had to have done by now. Gingerly, he settled his hands on the bed again, felt Spook's cold fingers wrapped around his knuckles. He was missing something, could sense it in the air between them, the itch beneath his skin and the way Spook was looking at him. He quirked an eyebrow. He hated having only half the picture. That sort of mystery had a habit of sticking like gum to his shoes, leaving him in a full state of agitation until he had a full frame of reference. Spook, does Allie have something to do with this? He didn't expect to get a reply. Spook locked his lips up tight. It didn't matter. Words weren't necessary between them. Xane could read that affirmation right off of him. Fuck, had he been wrong to encourage the relationship? No, wait, she couldn't possibly have physically done this herself. Wouldn't even, because she loved Spook. Had someone used her as their excuse? That's when he knew that things were about to get really ugly. I'm going to step out and update the guys, okay? I'll find out about Allie and tell them there's no visiting, but it'll only stall them a while. Back in 5. Don't go anywhere. That earned him the tiniest of huffs, but even that felt like a boon after the last few hours.